gone into more detail, but if you were just interested in seeing kind of overall, in the Dropbox, where it says talk, there's two sets of slides, but one set of slides is in Espanol. So if you thought it would be useful even to use with other people here at the university, there are some slight differences between the English and the Spanish, but they're basically the same. So tomorrow, do you think it better to, well, I certainly am not going to talk in Spanish, but better for them to see the English slides?
Because it's done, the people don't understand, you can read in the slides.
See, that's what I thought, just from my perspective. If I'm listening to somebody speaking Spanish, it's easier for me if I see the Spanish words on the screen than the English. Well, I'm not making the translation, and when I see the Spanish words, I can understand it. Okay.
I think everybody can read English.
Can read English. Okay. And again, you're certainly welcome to come, but just know that particularly at the beginning, we'll talk about learning outcomes of the CEO syllabus, we'll talk about curriculum design, and so on. Okay. So we spent some time looking at learning outcomes, and the last thing we were talking about was the reason that we want to identify learning outcomes, or two of them, is that it should point us to teaching methods and learning assessment methods. So we sometimes call this, speaking up on Alejandra Gonzalez, wow. She's now online. Skype her. She's from Bogota, Javeriana. So the learning outcomes tell us what students should know, be able to do, have an attitude about the end of the course. And depending on what they are, we align the teaching methods. That's kind of what are the appropriate activities for students in order to achieve the learning outcomes. An assessment is going to answer the question, how can students demonstrate they have achieved the desired outcomes? Now, you never want to go from in your course, say, okay, here's the learning outcome, now I'm going to assess you. There has to be some opportunity for students to engage in that. But sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Is that activity that students are doing, is that a learning activity? Is that learning assessment? They're going to look very close. So this afternoon, and actually in the next hour, we're just going to look at a few teaching learning activities. And tomorrow afternoon, we'll go back to what our learning outcomes are, and we'll look at some strategies for assessing learning. So all of these handouts that are on the front table, and Dan has sat herself right in the middle of them, and we'll use tomorrow. Okay. Let me back up one. So we talk about, and those of you who are looking at it, or downloading it, we're at slide 31 here. When we talk about, we sometimes use the term active learning, or experiential learning, or active and experiential learning. And let me give you the difference. When it's active learning, not active teaching, you say, I've been jumping around all week, I'm a pretty active teacher. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at students engaging in the learning process, connecting with. This does not mean that the students are up and jumping around and up and about. You can be sitting perfectly still in a lecture, and you need to engage the students. It means that they're connecting with the lecture. They're active in their processing. They are listening and sorting in their head and making sense of. And you say, well, of course, that's what we always do in lecture. But if I'm the lecturer, so that's engaging students directly in thinking and problem-solving activities. And the emphasis is on students manipulating, applying, analyzing, and evaluating ideas. So some examples, and we did some of these this week. Okay? Because if I had been, since Monday, just talking to you, many of you would have been engaged, because you're thinking about this, you're figuring it out, you're sorting it, you're applying it. Okay? But I, as the instructor, don't really know who's engaged and who's not. Because some of you can be looking directly at me and smiling, and really, you're doing the soccer game, the football game from last night. Because you've learned to say, okay, if I just, look bright enough. Now, if you actually fall asleep and snore, that gives me an indication. So one of that you're not engaged, or at least not engaged in the process. So the reason that we stop and do the pair and share, the group discussions, I put you in groups, I said you turn to your, pair and share is like turn to your neighbor. Turn to the person next to you and talk about it. It's coming out of your head, so it's not just in your head, it's coming out of your mouth, so I know that you're engaged, and I'm giving you a chance to talk about it. Okay? We often don't know something until we have to explain it. As I said to you, if I give you a new concept, like the concept of, let's say it's metacognition, and I can explain it to you, and you're listening, you're engaged, you're thinking about it, and you can say, all right, I understand that. I understand what metacognition is all about, from listening and sorting it out. So I say to you, okay, explain it to someone else. When I had you say, when we talked about the context, the professional context, okay, what is it I explained it to you, we gave examples, we seemed to agree on that, and then I said to you, okay, explain it to someone, how would you explain it to someone who's not here today? So when you're trying to explain it, you realize either, I really didn't understand it because I can't explain it to someone else. So you give students an opportunity to engage with it, either by talking to someone else, by writing down. So group discussions, debates, concept questions, the same thing. Okay? Even the simple fact wasn't a concept question, but I would say to you, okay, yes or no, hold up your cards. Okay? And I say, well, that's kind of silly and kind of childish to have these little colored cards. And usually when I do this, people by the end of the workshop will say, did you used to teach primers, little kindergarten? No, not really, but the same strategy. But what is that forcing you to do? By forcing you to make a response, you've had to think about it. You've had to make a decision and give a response. The same thing happens if you require students to take notes. The fact that and there's research on this, that students actually learn better and retain longer if they're taking notes. Because to take the notes, you have to listen, process, summarize, put it down on paper. And then I know, as the instructor, you're engaged. So you're typing notes. All of that is active learning. When active learning, it's not experiential, when active learning, the actions or the active learning really is simulating or modeling what the profession does. It's an experience of your professional practice. We call it experiential learning. So students take on roles that simulate professional engineering practice. So for example, doing a design implement experience, building something. Not only are they actively engaged, it's an experience that looks like a profession. Okay? Using these little colored cards, you're actively engaged, but it's really not something that you do as an engineer. Okay? So it's not experiential learning, it's active learning. Problem-based learning, simulations, case studies. So anytime we put students in the role of their professional engineering practice, we call it experiential learning. So these are just some, those are the distinctions we make between active learning. So all experiential learning is active. Not all active learning is experiential. Okay? All right, so I have a range here. All right, so I'm too fast.
Yes, ma'am.
Where am I? Here we go. No, it's jumpy today. It doesn't like that slide. Okay. So here are some examples of methods that you can use. And the reason I like to start here is that many people think that, okay, if I go to this CDIO approach, everything has to be a project. You know, I can't do anything with, you know, I have to do away with all the lectures. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, I did that. Thank you for noticing that, because I unplugged it when we were walking around back here. Gracias. So some of these strategies to engage the learners you can use in your lectures. So you don't, you say, oh my gosh, it's taken me so many years to prepare good lectures, do I have to throw them away? No. So a good number of them, 1, 2, 3, and 6 are perfectly effective to use during lecture, and we've used them here. So if you consider this a lecture, so I think lectures are good, we just need to make them a little more interactive. And for me as a lecturer or as a teacher, I'm much more comfortable in this kind of a setting, okay, in a small classroom. And in fact, when I was in teacher education at Illinois State, I had maybe 25 students at a time. I had several sections, but 25 students at a time. But the building that I taught in, across the hall was an auditorium. And there were classes going on in there, and there might have been 200 students in there. And it used to be a recurring nightmare for me that somebody would ask me to teach in an auditorium to 200 students. So nightmare? Okay, yeah. And I had nightmares about it. Well, in fact, last week at Nacional, there were between 60 and 80 people. We were in an auditorium, and they didn't even have a place, you know, a little